All right, what we see right now is now these recovery boats that are circling the capsule. And they will be preparing to set up a front porch for the extraction of these astronauts. And it is not clear how long it will take. Of course, it looks like they are putting every effort to doing that right now. But there's always, of course, this has been a tremendous mission for NASA and SpaceX together for this to happen. Now, of course, there are the USS John P. Murtha, which is a Navy recovery vessel to which these astronauts will be brought once they have been retrieved from this Orion capsule. And of course, this is an accomplishment not just for NASA or SpaceX, but for the entire world, considering the fact this is just one step ahead or one step towards having humans back on the moon.
For some 53 and a half years, we have reenacted that with the arrival of Integrity's astronauts as they flew around the moon in that historic lunar flyby that began with a trans-lunar injection burn that took them out of Earth orbit following 24 hours of a high Earth orbit trajectory. The high Earth orbit trajectory enabled flight controllers here to have a full 24 hours to evaluate the systems on Integrity and the condition of the crew before they would commit to flying to the moon.
Now, the Artemis II astronauts, they will be retrieved from this Orion capsule, and then they will be delivered to the medical bay aboard the U.S. Navy's USS John P. Murtha recovery vessel. Of course, this comes within 2 hours of splashdown. Now, we see some delay in this. There is a lot of reasons why this process takes a lot of time inside the crew. Of course, we heard that the crew they shut down the Orion systems. They were preparing for the hatch to open, which was then opened. And now after splashdown, of course, we had seen the divers assessing the air and water surrounding the capsule. And now that is done to just make sure that it is safe to approach and help the crew exit the Orion. This also ensures that there are no toxic substances like the hyperbolic fuels or ammonia around it, which could, of course, the dive crew will then, it has opened the Orion's hatch. There's a medical officer that has now entered the capsule. They will enter one by one, and there will be one at a time for each of the crew member. They will assess how the astronauts are doing inside. Now the plan is to help them then exit the capsule individually. They will, what we know is they will begin with Christina Koch, then Victor Clover, then Jeremy Hansen, and finally Reed Wiseman, the commander. Now, of course, we'll have to wait and see if that happens. So far, there are about 6 these boats that are surrounding this capsule to make that happen. They will be erecting an inflatable called the front porch on which these astronauts will be taken out on. It'll take a minute for them to get a hang of the environment, get their movement in the legs back, and then they'll be taken to the USS John P. Murtha, where they will be checked by medical officers for any sort of problem the astronauts might be going through, because of course coming back to Earth from the moon is of course puts a lot of exertion on the astronaut's body. Now, of course, what we had seen, we had some remarks from the astronauts coming down after splashdown. Artemis II Commander Reed Wiseman had provided a good report for the crew conditions inside Orion. And what he said, and I'm just quoting what he had said when he landed after the splashdown. He said, "What a journey. We are stable for green crew members." Of course, that indicated that all these 4 astronauts are in good shape. Now, with the astronauts now officially home, the spacecraft had made contact with the Pacific Ocean. This, of course, came after the parachutes had fluttered down to a restful water landing, a huge moment. Since the launch, NASA officials and as the astronauts themselves have said that this is a moment that would bring them a deep sigh of relief.
Inflatable life raft, known as the front porch, to be erected alongside the spacecraft for the extraction of the crew. Let's play for you an interview that my colleague Megan Cruz conducted on the USS John P. Murtha with Navy diver First Class David McMahon that explains how this process is unfolding.
Okay, Davey, so you and some of your team, one last look over of the stabilization collar, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what is this stabilization collar?
This is what's going to stabilize the capsule out there in the ocean. We don't know how good the weather or the waves will be that day, so this will help prevent any unnecessary occurrences from happening, stabilizing the capsule and the astronauts inside.
So basically this is a float that will go around Orion. I'm assuming that what they're doing right now, these are the lines that will attach the collar onto Orion?
That is correct.
And so what are they doing here?
So we've got the lower line that will secure the inflation device before we inflate it. That gives us the go-ahead that it's secure in space, and then we'll inflate it. And then once that is done, we'll undo all the carabiners and get this orange line on top tied in the same fashion. And then this will be secured to the capsule, and the astronauts can safely take their first steps out of the capsule onto the front porch.
Okay, and how long will it take them to set up the stabilization collar?
We should definitely be able to handle this in under 10 minutes.
Okay, wow. And then you just mentioned the front porch. So basically after they set up the stabilization collar, then they set up what's called the front porch here.
That's correct.
Okay, and what's the front porch?
Front porch is basically a bigger waiting room for the astronauts to sit in while we wait for the helicopters to show up and grab them.
Okay, so the medical team that was inside with the crew, they're going to help them out and onto the front porch?
That is correct.
And then what happens here?
We have higher trained medical personnel also on board the front porch that will give them lookovers and just make sure they're okay while we wait for the helicopters to show up.
Okay. How does it feel, I mean, your team, you, to be part of a mission that's returning astronauts from the moon in more than 50 years?
We all feel extremely honored to be a part of this, as well as a bigger mission for the Navy and joining up with NASA to do great things.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like you and your team are ready?
Yes, very ready.
Cool. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Once again, the recovery operations are continuing out in the Pacific. We shortly should see that life raft, the front porch, erected alongside the side hatch of the vehicle.
Okay, now the recovery team have confirmed that the capsule is now safe to approach. The divers have entered the capsule to check on the astronauts, and a fleet of boats now, as we see on your screens, as you can see as well, are now preparing to roll out some floatables. Now, what are these? As we just heard, these are inflatables that serve a key purpose. One will be wrapping around the Orion, and that is to stabilize it so that it doesn't move while the astronauts are being carried out. Then another will be a large raft. It's called a front porch that we just saw on screens what it looks like. It will be installed outside the capsule, and this will be where the astronauts will emerge as they prepare to be airlifted to the recovery ship. Now, since the splashdown, additional tests have been conducted that includes assessing the air and the water quality around the capsule, checking for toxic substances, and the capsule has been after the capsule was powered down to reduce power demand, and then to transition the capsule into recovery configuration, with the recovery officers now confirming that they are stable and everything's fine, and they will be now extracted. The side hatch had been opened. Of course, it takes a little time for each astronauts one by one to step out onto the raft. Now, of course, we'll have the Navy divers coming in with inflating the raft. They call the front porch, opening the hatch. Medical officers, of course, were the first ones to enter the capsule to assess how the astronauts are doing. Then the 4 astronauts will be assisted in exiting the capsule one by one. They will be readjusting to the Earth. This, of course, comes after 9 days of microgravity during their space flight. The recovery team is already now heading to the capsule to assist the crew out of the Orion, as we see on the screen. And the extraction process, usually it does take about 30 to 45 minutes to happen.
Inside, there are now 8 people inside. 4 divers, Navy divers, all with medical training, each assigned to an astronaut each. Making sure that they're comfortable, feeling good. As you've heard us say in the broadcast, you know, they expect a little bit of discomfort. Again, these astronauts just traveled back to Earth at 25,000 miles an hour, a nearly 695,000 mile journey around the moon. If you think you get car sick. Again, 6 boats out there, lots of gear with them, just in case, right? As we said, the crew reported feeling great, but again, all those folks out there in case they weren't, right? NASA is all about making sure we think about every situation that can happen, and so, of course, wanted to be ready in case any of our astronauts needed more medical attention while out there in the water. You see now teams, again, trying to set up the stabilization collar and front porch for the crew to get out of Orion. They need both, right? The stabilization collar will keep Orion from swaying as you see it is doing now. And then they will connect the front porch to the stabilization collar so that the crew can take 2 steps and they will be in the front porch. Not a lot of chatter on the mission audio loops. That's a good thing. Again, things proceeding pretty nominally, even if they're fighting some currents out there on the Pacific Ocean. Again, the goal, setting up the stabilization collar and the front porch so that the crew can rest comfortably in the front porch, get placed into harnesses so that 2 helicopters can lift them off the front porch and onto the USS John Murtha here.
While the recovery efforts do continue to take out the astronauts, first comments have now come in from the U.S. President Donald Trump already. Now, he's posted on Truth Social, and I'm just quoting him here. Congratulations to the great and very talented crew of Artemis II. The entire trip was spectacular. The landing was perfect. And as President of the United States, I could not be more proud. I look forward to seeing you all at the White House soon. We'll be doing it again, and then next step, Mars. President Donald J. Trump. First comment coming in from President Donald Trump, who had earlier also talked with these astronauts while they were in space. And his first comments congratulating Artemis II for a successful landing, as he mentions in his social media post, with the recovery teams now, of course, putting every effort to stabilize the Orion capsule and then extract the astronauts out of Orion capsule. First comments coming in from U.S. President Donald Trump.
Each will take turns picking up an astronaut. So Helo 1 will come on in, hover above the front porch, about 40 feet above the front porch. A Navy recovery specialist will be hoisted down into the front porch.
The restricted maneuvering doctrine is in effect.
Will connect to the first astronaut, which we're expecting to be Christina. And then Helo 2 comes around, picks up Jeremy, while Helo 1 stays above head. And then Helo 1 will come back in for another astronaut, and then Helo 2 for the last astronaut, and then back to the flight deck here on the recovery ship. I was talking to Assistant Artemis Recovery Director Paul Sierpinski. He said helos are a much quicker, safer way to get on board. They did actually consider boats, but then if you think about it, longer time, the crew would have to move through more of the ship. This way the helos will give a more direct, quicker route to the medical bay for our 4 astronauts. Beautiful shots from our aerial and imagery teams. Clouds have dissipated for a clear view from the bow of the recovery ship here. You can still see divers in the water there. Encircling Orion, that is that stabilization collar we've been telling you about. As you saw in that interview just a few minutes ago, they have to first connect it to Orion, and then once it's secured onto Orion, they can inflate it, and then they'll further secure it with other harnesses and lines. About an hour and 10 minutes since splashdown in the Pacific Ocean here. Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy back home after a history-making mission to the moon and back. If you missed what we said just a couple of minutes ago, the undersea medical officer inside with the crew in Orion reporting all 4 crew members feeling great. Progress being made there on the stabilization collar. It looks like they are beginning to inflate it. And it looks like they're starting to unfold the front porch in order to get that into the water here shortly and inflate that as well. Again, more than 40 people out in the water right now. And those Navy and NASA personnel have been in the water for now about 4 hours. The reason why they had to get out so early is just to stage everything. And actually here on the ship, when there are flight operations happening, you can't have anything else, right? Just because the flight deck can be a dangerous place, so they just want to focus on planes coming and going from the ship, so that's why they wanted to get the boats in the water to make sure that they have all the time they needed for the flight ops. And then the same crew here out in the water, they will stay out in the water for a number of hours after we recover the crew and get them back on the ship, because then they have to recover Orion. All right, that stabilization collar looking good around Orion. We're now seeing some recovery personnel getting on to that collar. Again, they need to further attach it to Orion to make sure that it can really prop up the spacecraft. It's basically lifting it up off of the water just a tad. Again, so it's not so so it doesn't sway so much in the water there. And now that front porch looks like it's nearly fully inflated as well. You can see a much larger surface area. And so once the crew get out of Orion, they can stretch their legs a little bit on this front porch, get some fresh air. And enjoy this beautiful day here on their home planet. It appears teams now are about to connect the front porch to the stabilization collar. And at that point, when both are secure, we should soon see astronauts come out of Orion. All these views you see also being fed to the Landing Force Operations Center here on the ship. Of course, it is very important for our recovery teams leading the mission to have all the views that you're seeing as well. Again, listening to their communication loop here on the ship. Very quiet, which is a good thing. It means things are going pretty nominally, meaning as expected. Again, all this activity happening just 3,000 yards away from the ship. So that means this will be a very quick flight back on the helicopters for the crew. 2-3 minutes, and then they'll be back here on the ship.
I know.
Okay, saw a thumbs up from one of the personnel on the front porch. It looks like they are now getting ready to deploy what they call the Air Rescue Vest, ARV. And so this is the harness that each crew member will get into in order to be hoisted into the helicopters. Again, those helicopters hovering just about 40 feet above the front porch when they're ready to pick up each crew member.
This is Mission Control Houston. Behind me, a fairly raucous scene as hundreds of flight controllers have poured into the flight control room here. This is reminiscent of the scene after the final shuttle mission of STS-135, although that was the end of a program. This is only the beginning of a program with the textbook splashdown of Integrity and its 4 astronauts. We're standing by for the crew to be extracted from the spacecraft. Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling invited all of these flight controllers who have contributed to this mission to enter the flight control room to have an opportunity to receive well wishes and to share the mutual glow that exists in the wake of a textbook mission for Integrity. On the front screen here in Mission Control, a sign that says "Welcome Home, Integrity," taking humanity back to the moon, going further, and returning safely to Earth. So all of that jubilation, part of the post-splashdown activities, even as we await the crew being extracted from the vehicle to be hoisted onto Navy helicopters for the trip back to the USS John P. Murtha. Once again here in Mission Control, this view of the Artemis flight control room, known as the White Flight Control Room. This is the old shuttle flight control room, and now is the home of Artemis missions to the moon and beyond. Once again, quite a few flight controllers were invited in by Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling to share in the jubilation following the successful splashdown of Integrity. That splashdown occurring an hour and 22 minutes ago, as we stand by for the completion of the extraction of the crew, and ultimately they're hoisting onto Navy helicopters for a short flight back to the USS John P. Murtha.